Welcome. Today we have a very exciting faculty with us, Professor Gordon Adomdza. He is the founder of many things here at Ashesi when it comes to entrepreneurship. Without getting into your story, I'd like to give you the opportunity to tell us a bit about yourself so that our audience can get to know who you are and what are the things that make you tick.
Thank you so much, Innocent. Always a pleasure to engage with you. As you said, Gordon Adomdza. I'm an associate professor here in entrepreneurship, and I like to add innovation in the BA department. So because we're talking about entrepreneurship, I'll just say a few things about some of the things I've been fortunate to participate in. So I had the privilege of helping start the Ashesi Design Lab. And because that's focused on design, we also started the Ashesi Venture Accelerator, which is now Ashesi Startup Launchpad. And then down the line, started the AVI, the Ashesi Venture Incubator. And then because we had so much going on in entrepreneurship on campus, helped form the Entrepreneurship Center, which I led for 2 years. So yeah, that's sort of a bit of background.
What do you think is the true intersection or the connection of these different facets, entrepreneurship, education, and the bulging population in Africa?
The information or the data says that Sub-Saharan Africa is going to, the way it's put, power the next phase of global population growth. I think it's something like 8 out of the 10 fastest growing countries will be in Sub-Saharan Africa. That means a huge sudden surge in the youth population. I think the median age now is about 18. That's a problem. For a lot of people say it's an opportunity, but it's also a problem, especially for educators, because at the moment we have a hiring freeze in the public sector. I had the opportunity to work with some very wonderful young people at the statistical service, and they were telling me they're looking for jobs because they knew that they couldn't get hired because of the hiring freeze in the public sector. The private sector is not growing as fast as we were hoping it will grow, right? I mean, look at Ghana. We moved from Ghana Beyond Aid to, I think at the moment, we will take any aid we can get, right? So if graduates are not getting absorbed in the public sector, the private sector is not growing up as fast, then educational institutions have a big problem. They need to figure out how to help their graduates fit into society after school. The ILO data says that graduate unemployment rate is about 12%, but we have a graduate unemployment association, for instance, and so you know that on the ground is very different. So how should educational institutions solve this problem? One way is to empower young people to be entrepreneurial in the work they do so they can create value, so they can develop new processes to be efficient and have the organizations they work for grow. Another way is to empower them to start new enterprises, to start new ventures so that the economy can expand. And when you take an institution like Ashesi, which has entrepreneurship in its mission, right? To educate ethical entrepreneurial leaders. We don't have a choice but to double down on entrepreneurship given the impending youth bulge, right? So what does that look like? It means that we need to bring in entrepreneurship in almost every course, every level. And that's where this Foundations of Design and Entrepreneurship course comes in, a mandatory course that introduces all freshmen, irrespective of your major, to the entrepreneurial process. So this is not a course about entrepreneurship, it's a course about how to become an entrepreneur, how to go through the processes, whether you plan to be an engineer or you plan to start a business. Because through this set of experiences, we hope that graduates can refer back to, and we've seen this, refer back to those experiences of, exploring problems, scoping them out, conducting research, identifying new ideas, building prototypes, testing them, that they can apply that to their regular job routines if they work in large organizations, or they can apply that to start new ventures.
It's interesting that you spoke about the process of idea generation, carrying out research, prototyping. These are words that are quite familiar to any particular Ashesi undergraduate. But what exactly does entrepreneurship entail?
There are a couple of angles from which I could take this, but I think at the core of it is solving problems. Right? So, entrepreneurship, given that it has so many different definitions, one way to look at it is that you solve a problem and you put an enterprise frame to it, right? So that it can generate either value through revenue or impact. That's what problem solving, you know. So then what it means is we need to identify what the problem is. In Foundations of Design Entrepreneurship, one of the things we realize is that helping young people understand problems is one of the things that is at the core of starting to change the mindset about entrepreneurship, right? So if you remember, we have the Problems Festival, which is what we start the course with, where the tagline is where problems are analyzed and solutions are penalized. And it's just for that day, right?
That day, yes.
You take a problem, you scope it out, you look at the causes and effects, you look at stakeholders, you map it out, and you do a science fair kind of setup to present these problems. No solutions. Why? Because problem scoping is one of the big issues that young people go through. You know, you hear young people talk about problems and the scope is so high that they get completely overwhelmed. And then they tend to say the government should do something. So we're teaching young people to bring it down. We call it the helicopter view, right? Helicopters fly below the clouds, so your vision is not impaired, but it also doesn't go all the way to the problem and solve it there, ignoring all the other factors and stakeholders that you need to engage. The helicopter flies a little bit high so that you can get a systems view of the factors around the problem, get a good sense of the stakeholders to engage, whilst identifying the user that you need to solve a problem for, right? So that's a key part of the entrepreneurial process. Having a clear user to solve a problem for, being very clear on who to engage in building value and delivering value, and even capturing returns from that value, right? Because that helps you do a better job in then building the value proposition and taking it to market, you know. And so once that's clear on what the problem is, who the user is, and so forth, then we formulate ways of collecting market information and user information. Right? So we use ethnographic frame. You go beyond quantitative data to the whys, the hows, the qualitative elements of the problem, you know, engaging the users, engaging the stakeholders. And with that research, we do sense making, where you try to get a point of view of how you should attack this problem, right? What is missing? What is the key insights that you need to build your solution on? And that's where ideation and prototyping comes in. Prototyping is extremely important, because we found that a lot of young people would just take a solution and run to market, right? But when I said the process of teaching about the way to do entrepreneurship, not just teaching about how entrepreneurs have done it, right? What's the process and how do you engage with that process? Prototyping helps people to capture the solution and test it before you spend significant amount of resources.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And that's key, so that you can learn fast, fail fast, and then build on the lessons. You take the lessons learned and build on the solution for success in the market.
And I love the fact that you have touched on this continuously iterative process, where if someone is an entrepreneur, then they need to continuously validate whatever they have made, and as a form of a prototype. I know that what some of the founders say is that if you can just get someone to test out your product and give you feedback, then you can get to quickly change. So fail fast and learn fast. I think that's what they say in Silicon Valley.
Exactly.
So now, but for many people, so we have youth that are in this particular challenge of failing to find employment. And like you rightfully said, if they can get to pick up more entrepreneurial skill set, then they could either create their own enterprises or find ways in which they solve problems within their communities and build a business on top of it. But then we might actually have some youth that are actually currently employed and they do have the capacity to start off a venture. But then it so happens that it's seemingly very, very complicated to leave that maybe good paying job to start something that has a probability of failing. So I remember one of the first definitions we had of entrepreneurship was that it's risk taking.
Right.
For you to be an entrepreneur, you need to be willing to take the risk.
Absolutely.
So what structures do you think can be put in place to ensure that as someone makes that transition from either being in a work environment to starting up a firm, or when they think that the risks are just too many, what support structures can be put through institutions and even at a national macroscopic level? What support structures would need to be put in place to ensure that happens?
Right. It's a multifaceted question. So yes, maybe I can talk a little bit about how we envisaged the Ashesi Venture Incubator concept, and then add on, because these are recent grads, so then maybe speculate a little bit about how it should be done with grads that have been out for a number of years, So the Ashesi Venture Incubator is focused on solving the problem of how do you encourage enterprising students on campus to then take those ideas to build ventures on them when they graduate. So we look for students who are doing something on campus, and then you take them into incubation for a year. Now, to take a step back, the program was as a result of a grant that we won with MIT D Lab, supported by USAID, to, among other things, build an incubator. So, among other things, prototype what the concept of an Ashesi Venture Incubator would look like, right? So we had room to do a lot of experiments. So one of the things our point of view was that students currently graduating have to typically do national service for a year, right? So if you have a venture out of school, you would have to maybe pause it or do it at part-time for a year because you're doing national service. What if we could merge the two? What if we can hire you to work on your business for a year, right? Yeah. Most incubators will be 3 months, 6 months, but ours is a year. It goes for a year because of that. So if we have you for a year, what it means is that we're paying you a stipend. So we're de-risking the startup
entire
process. So that's number one, right? It's important to help to de-risk the startup process for young people, and for us, paying a monthly stipend was one of the ways to do that, right? Which meant that you could buy data, you can get transport, you can get lunch, and go out and do market research, And we also know the family pressures. Young person in their room, it's midday and they say they are an entrepreneur, right? Or then the family members will just send them, go here, go there. Yeah. So we rented spaces in incubators near them so they can get up and go to work every day.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Get up and leave the house. That's a motivation to go do market research as well. You have a stipend, you can do market research, and you can do customer acquisition. And then we built a really strong 4-module program on 4 quarters, right? So you spend the first quarter refining your business model. You spend the second quarter doing customer acquisition, the third quarter doing financial modeling, the fourth quarter doing developing your marketing and your pitch and so forth. And then we build simulations on that. So even if your venture is not ready to do customer acquisition, what would it look like if you were doing market acquisition? So we will build simulations into the process for them, so they are practicing as they go along as they engage with the module, right? And then it was very clear for us that they still, if they had a problem that required technical assistance, that it would be difficult for them to just get that, right? So we provided professional services. We contracted professional service providers, whether they're accounting professionals, engineering, and so forth, so that they can help them solve technical problems, And then we had a mentorship program. So mentors from industry that will hold their hands and just like engage with them, encourage them, make phone calls for them and so forth. And then we added a counselor who did use MBTI personality test at the beginning, and then sort of engaged with them based on their personalities and how the business evolved, to make sure that their mental health was sound and they were building their venture successfully. So you listen to all that and you're like, wow, that's too much. But the fact is that young people don't have a lot of resources in this part of the world to support them to start businesses. And so for educational institutions like ours, with entrepreneurship in our mission again, we need to go a little bit further in building the structures that support young people. And in fact, the outcomes have been great, right? Because over 4 years, 4 cohorts rather, we had very good milestones. The fellows were able to raise more than $500,000 in funding. Jobs created more than 200. We had about 94 or so% of them completing the program. And a very important statistic, the number of fellows who stayed in business after incubation was about 80%.
That's amazing.
That is higher than most incubators can boast of.
That's amazing.
Right? So the point here is that providing the support in granular form, in a design sort of thinking way, trying to understand what the fellows need. How do you meet them at their point of need? Even if it's not existent, if what you're providing does not exist in the market, how do you provide it for them in your incubator so that they can be more successful? Now take that into sort of alumni many years out, because the AVI, Ashesi Venture Incubator, is for graduating students and people who have been out for about 2 to 3 years. Right? Now, if you go further into number of years post-graduation, 7 to 5 years, the dynamics are a bit different. Now, why 5 to 7 years? The data globally shows that when people graduate, they will go and work in a particular field for about 5 to 7 years before they start an entrepreneurial venture, right? What does it mean? It means that educational institutions should be building alumni entrepreneurship incubator programs, right? They should be going out and engaging with alumni who have been out for about 5 to 7 years and trying to understand what they're interested in and what they want to start ventures around. But that cohort is a cohort that would have been recently married, probably have a child or two. They probably have a mortgage, or they are starting a building project. They have a car loan and so forth. They're not going to just get up and go start a business.
Yep.
Right?
There's a lot of risks now.
There's so much risk. There's so much that will become unstable if they took an entrepreneurial path. And so then you need to figure out how to first engage them to then work on ideas, maybe sometimes within the companies that they are working in, and sometimes outside. One of the ways is bring them in to do master's programs, right? Where they can sort of scope out areas of interest, and then maybe if the stars line up, then they can jump, right? Some organizations are willing to do spin-offs, right? So through the person's project within the company, within the master's program, from the company, they could build a business unit, a new business unit, and spin it off. Some people could then jump because they can raise the funding to support themselves, So there are a couple of ways there, but hypothetically, if you could provide income replacement to people who have been out 5 to 7 years, then they can do anything they want.
You stabilize.
Right, you stabilize them. They are able to get that ping on their phone, that a monthly stipend or pay just landed. Everything is stable.
They become more comfortable to be.
Then they can
more entrepreneurial
and be more entrepreneurial.
Okay. Yeah. One of the things that I think would be important to talk about is when you take a look at the particular students that you have supported through Ashesi, and the funding that you have been able to provide for them. What channels did you see being very important to establish so that those people with particular ideas could get the necessary funding to push those ideas beyond maybe the first tier to something like a Series B or Series A?
Sure. Yes. So we always say that in this part of the world, angel funding, which is normally what you need for startups, it's non-existent, right? So we have to resort to all kinds of complex funding mechanisms to support young people, and part of that is how do you support young people to get grants that then help them build value propositions, reduce their bottom line, and get them to then be qualified for equity investments or maybe some combination of loans and so forth, right? So in our program, in the Ashesi Venture Incubator program, one of the things we do very well is to help the fellows build a really strong pitch. And I mentioned simulations. We actually take them out to banks, to investor firms that we have relationships with, and we simulate the process, right? So to say, call up our colleagues at the bank and say, we're going to bring these two people, and the hypothetical situation we're working with is that they need X amount of money to fulfill an order. So we'll come and then we'll talk through what is needed, right? Or we'll go to an angel investor group, the Accra Angels, another one with Nelson Amo, for instance, and then we'll say we're bringing them to come and do a pitch, so that we can go through the process of what they need to potentially win funding from you. So they go through those simulations. And then once they graduate, there's also what we call Ashesi, the AVI-X, so AVI Extra, which is funding opportunities, they're grants that we provide the ventures to bridge a gap, right? So maybe to buy inventory or to buy an equipment or to maybe build out a website, something that they need to get onto the next phase, if you will, because we realize that a lot of the fellows are normally not ready for acceleration right when they finish the incubation program, right? Because the requirements for acceleration, how much sales you are making and so forth, are normally very high. So it becomes a question of how do you fill in the gap for them, and it's through things like AVI-X and also engaging with the ecosystem, so that we're helping them apply for competitions and so forth. We're helping them do multiple pitches to angels that are interested in supporting them. So our poster child is Kevin Blankson, who runs Swoove. So Swoove is a program that came through the AVI. It's one of our first cohort members, and he developed the idea of doing logistics using data to improve on logistics, basically fulfillment. So when somebody orders for a bag on a site, how do you get the bag to them in their house? By connecting multiple delivery options and so forth, right? Sometimes aggregating and so forth. So he came through the program, and because he was able to sort of build a really strong value proposition, he's gone on to raise multiple rounds of funding. He got into Mest Express, which is the Meltwater Entrepreneurial School of Technology. They have a program, it's a incubator program as well. He was able to raise funding there. He even did Africa Business Conference at Harvard, placed, I think, third there. He was able to raise funding from a number of people, some of whom are connected to our ecosystem. These are some of our Ashesi funders, who had come through campus and listened to the pitches through the deep dive program. Right? I was able to raise funding through a number of them. So just by pitching multiple times at these competitions and these programs, he's been able to sort of build legitimacy for his project, and he's been able to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding, really.
Wow.
And so we look at that, and yes, not many of the fellows are Kevin Blankson or are Swoove, but it definitely shows that it's possible.
Yes,
right.
Certainly.
It is very possible. So if we can double down on some of the ways of preparing people to navigate the very turbulent early stage funding space, which is often called the valley of death. If we can figure out a way to help people navigate that, there's promise in the Series A's and Series B's and so forth in funding.
How do we scale this perception of entrepreneurship as the solution to the national employment problem or the continental employment problem? How do we scale that perspective in a way that filters down to the cultural units, the family unit, so that many people have an appreciation that entrepreneurship is something that they could say, my child is doing that? How do we communicate that message in that appealing way?
Right. That's a really good question. And yeah, thinking about how to break the family sort of pushback is definitely something that it's something we consider. So I'll take it from two angles. One is traction, right? So I think it's right for families to say, we need you to do something sustainable, something stable, right? Entrepreneurship is very risky, it's very uncertain. And so when you say, I'm an entrepreneur, the question is, well, you don't have a job, right? So if you say I'm an engineer or I'm a doctor, you have a job. But the fact is that, there's a risk reward sort of calculus, right? And for the successful entrepreneurs, the reward was much, much higher. A lot of times higher than the reward you will get for the traditional, stable jobs, right? So starting out, I think the way our programs are structured, it's one of the keys, right? Teaching people to prototype and test and gain traction. So I built a widget, I tested it, 1 million people, no, million is probably too big, 100
people,
100, 200, 1,000 people were interested. I went to this competition, that other competition, this other competition, everybody's talking about this. So your parents probably wanted you to be a doctor, but here you are, gaining traction on something that they don't quite understand, but everybody's talking about it. That could help shift their mindset a little bit, right? So going for traction and capturing traction is extremely important. That's why we encourage that prototype, that lean startup sort of approach to venture creation, And so, because we've seen it, right, where families finally, sometimes they'll say, I'll give you 6 months. If it doesn't work, we've seen that, know. And so I think there's something there. And then on the other hand, I think there's a misconception that for young people, that when your father or mother says you should take the family tradition of becoming an engineer or a doctor, then it means that you cannot pursue entrepreneurship. Because if you think about it, let's go back to the data that says people will work for 5-7 years. Be the doctor or engineer that your family wants you to be, right? but then build an enterprise out of it. Because after all, the global data shows that when you get into business, most people will start something for 5 to 7 years and then build an enterprise. We need more engineers starting engineering shops and engineering organizations and not working for the government. We need more doctors branching out, coming together, forming, building family offices, coming up with very creative ways of providing care, outside of the mainstream. We need more accountants doing very creative sort of accounting, democratizing, if you will, accounting services. We need a lot of these so-called stable job roles to become entrepreneurial. So in many ways, perhaps it's actually not a bad idea to do what your family wants you to do and become an entrepreneur.
So there is a possibility for both worlds to coexist if you need it to be.
We've seen it. Some of the celebrated regular mainstream job roles are the ones who have built enterprises on them outside of mainstream.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When you hear a doctor, yesterday there was one, can't remember his name, but I saw a video of someone who was awarded a CNN Heroes. He got a CNN Heroes Award. And this guy had put a van on the road and provided care to thousands of people in rural Ghana, right? You can't do that as a doctor working in a government hospital. Maybe you can't, but I don't see that, right? You have to get out. Again, entrepreneurship is when you have a creative, innovative idea and you put an enterprise frame to it, right? You have to get out and do something amazing with the talent that you have, something bigger, more impactful than your 9 to 5, if you will. Not to say that people in regular industries only work 9 to 5, but you get what I'm saying. So I think there are points of intersection that we probably need to start exploring. And one, families need to also care about what their children aspire to be and what they want and engage them. But young people probably also need to take a second look at family requirements and demands and ask themselves, is this a limitation? Is this preventing me from achieving what I want to achieve in the future? You probably realize that it is not.
To continue with the conversation, one of the things that I have seen in as far as many countries where you've had a lot of entrepreneurial activity blossoming is that there's often a huge support, not just from the community that we're talking about, for example, in the case of Silicon Valley now, but there's also huge support from the public sector or from the government itself. So, for example, at the start of Silicon Valley, there was a lot of intentionality from the government side. We talk about the development of electric vehicles. Now, Tesla got a huge grant from the government that facilitated them building what we are now seeing as a $1 trillion company, right? And most likely going to continue growing from here on forward. And so when we think about it in the context of African countries and in the context of us genuinely wanting to ensure that as Africa continues to grow and as Africa continues to have a lot of young people in the forthcoming years, we would want to have a lot of entrepreneurial ventures established. So what role can the government play in ensuring that that particular entrepreneurial environment has been guaranteed? And if not the government, other non-governmental organizations that find themselves with the same degree of capacity as governments, what type of a role can they play to ensure that that environment at least gets a kickstart, and then from there we begin to see the ventures that we would desire?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, the role of government is important. It takes me to what's often called the triple helix. So government, industry, and academia, right? You need government to set the agenda for innovation and entrepreneurship. And so in Ghana, for instance, we're working on the startup bill, which will then empower startups in terms of providing them with funding, helping them with intellectual property administration, and also connecting them, providing opportunities like local content, ensuring that startups are able to provide services to support contracts, and not everything will be fulfilled by foreign companies, for instance, right? So those opportunities are important. The government has a set of development goals. For instance, MESTI, the Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation, identified 8 areas that they want to see Ghana develop. So it's important that there is funding provided for not just large companies or agencies, but also entrepreneurs and innovators to provide solutions and services within those areas. And the other thing the other interesting element of to this is that if you look at the way government works, a lot of government projects are funded by development agencies, from almost every country that has a development agency. So there is a real opportunity for development agencies to work with governments to empower innovators and scientists and entrepreneurs in specific areas that fit the development agenda. And you see that already in agriculture, in digital skills, in fintech and so forth. So that's already happening. And I think what we need to do is to double down and also have coordination among these agencies and also among government agencies. So there is a coordinated effort in a number of those areas. The way entrepreneurs, like our students or our entrepreneurs, can benefit is to track the competitions and challenges that are often held in those spaces.
Okay.
Because those competitions come with grant funding that they can take advantage of and use to build out their ventures and also scale them. So those opportunities are there. We're also seeing a lot of engagement in industry through investor groups, through hubs like the Ghana Hubs Network, and so forth. And industries, there are a lot of companies that are opening their doors to internships and also running competitions where they are able to encourage young people to come up with value propositions that impact the industry that they're in. So once that continues to foster, we will see we will see the ecosystem start to evolve. It's ongoing, but we would need it to increase. We need activities in those spaces to increase. And of course, academia has to play its part to ensure that projects that are done on campuses. We're talking about undergraduate thesis projects, master's thesis projects, PhD thesis projects. Do we have a commercialization angle to a lot of these projects?
Those projects,
right? Where we're supporting the developers to build intellectual property and then make it marketable, commercializable on the market, or connecting scientists with entrepreneurs to form teams so that even when the scientists don't see themselves as becoming entrepreneurs, the team members can take those ideas to market and work on them.
Now, science is an interesting field altogether. When I think about science, I always think about this really cool discipline that really focuses on taking an observation of the world around us in its natural state and how it behaves. And engineering builds on top of that. And artificial intelligence is kind of, in my mind, is an extrapolation of that. And artificial intelligence is one of the most popular technologies at the moment right now, and it threatens or promises to really impact the entire entrepreneurial environment and landscape. But it's not just AI. You also have things like blockchain that are completely transforming financial industries. You have all these other promising technologies, IoT, Now, because we have all these things on the global scale, what type of trends, right, do you think that entrepreneurs here in Africa, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, can take advantage of or learn from or forecast into the future basing on such that we might have many of those even unicorn companies coming out of sub-Saharan Africa? Any particular trends that you feel, if there's a startup you want to build now, you have an interest in that, and you want to solve a problem in that space, jump onto that trend, is going to be amazing in the future?
It's an interesting question. From the funding perspective, I think the area that we've seen a lot of funding these days is fintech, right? So I think that the African region is probably one of the fastest growing fintech spaces, and companies are doing payments and all kinds of interesting things with wallets. But a lot of people will tell you that we probably need to go to the basics. Ghana, for instance, I think we import probably 50% of our food, and there are a lot of complexities with the agricultural value chain that AI can help us solve, right? This year, for instance, I have never seen this before. It's rained almost every month, and that disrupts planting and cultivation and crop management and all of that, even insects sort of, development and all of that, right? How can we use AI models to help us understand and predict changes in weather? How do we use AI models to help us understand how much fertilizer to apply in a particular month because perhaps the soil structure has changed? How do we use AI to help us track produce along the agricultural value chain so we can reduce post-harvest losses? How do we use AI to help us in retailing and adding value to agricultural produce? What do we do to prevent more than 50% of watermelon harvest going to waste, for instance?
And that statistic is really crazy. Like every time I think about it, if you have a farmer, right, and they have planted something, it means out of two, they're throwing away one.
They're going to throw away one.
And all of that is due to logistics.
Exactly. A lot of that is due to logistics, and there's a lot of data we can harness and do something with. And we have all these young people who are building models and, AI models to do all kinds of funky things. How do we bring them to align with the real problems that we have? We're talking about galamsey and water quality. How do we ensure that our water tables and systems are secure and sustained from contamination? There's so many, healthcare, right? Right, healthcare, it's so interesting. When we talk about AI, one of the things I realize is one of the discussions that come up is that if you do anything with data today, you have the opportunity to automate with the data. You have the opportunity to do something, in an AI sense with the data to provide more value. We have healthcare data at various levels. What can we do? How do we build systems? What systems do we build to then harness that data and add value to provide care, extend care, sustain care? There's so many opportunities. The one that I think is staring us in the face right now is climate change. You've seen the disruption in weather patterns globally. Just, I think this week at COP28, countries agreed to move away from fossil fuels. They didn't get all the way to eradicate, but move away from fossil fuels. That is a huge opportunity for innovation. What does it mean for us? Within that climate space, we're normally focused on climate adaptation because we're trying to figure out how we contend with sort of the disruptions in weather patterns. But there's so many opportunities in mitigation, right? Figuring out how we build systems that can feed into carbon programs and so forth. We have forests that we need to conserve. How do we build systems around it and feed them into the carbon system so we can also contribute and get returns in the area of climate mitigation? What does it mean for our engineers and data analysts and business students for the world to move away from fossil fuels, right? If we map the space, where are the opportunities? I think there are many, and I think if there's a startup today that wants to really plug in, and if it's generating data, it's to figure out how to use AI to improve on its outcomes in terms of the data. If it's focused on big issues like climate change and so forth, it should figure out where the tide is moving. All right, maybe projects in mitigation, or maybe projects in fuel efficiency. I think yesterday, a company in Texas that's doing conversions of petrol vehicles into electric vehicles. Huge opportunity. So I think there are some interesting spaces that startups can focus on.
This has been an excellent conversation. I think we could go on in the multiple dimensions, borrowing from every single thing that you have been talking about, but this has been an excellent conversation, and it has been a pleasure to have you with me, Professor Gordon. Until we meet again.
Thank you, Innocent. Always a pleasure.
Thank you too.